Principal Matters Podcast 214. Hi, Principal Matters listeners. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast. Each week we bring you inspiring, innovative, and imaginative ideas for your own school leadership. This week, I'm talking about Pause, Breathe, Flourish, Living Your Best Life as an Educator, book review with Dr. Jeff Springer, Part 2. If you were listening to last week's episode, you know that Jeff Springer is a retired principal, but a former Texas State Principal of the Year. He was the principal of Magnolia High School for several years and now a dear friend. And Jeff has been asking me questions about my newest book, Pause, Breathe, Flourish, Living Your Best Life as an Educator, which you can find at connected.org. Jeff, welcome back to Principal Matters. Thank you for taking a part 2 in this conversation. Really, this is the third time now you've been on my show. And I just want Principal Matters listeners to know, too, that Jeff does amazing work. And Jeff, before we get going, will you remind people where to find you on your website if they want to find your resources or connect with your consulting?
Absolutely. Thank you, Will. And it's so good to be back. And again, it's fun to talk about things that you're passionate about, and definitely passionate about your work in this book as it relates to the role that administrators play in the lives of their teachers and their school communities and their students. Yes, Spring Strategies, LLC, it's a consulting. I do educational consulting, and you can find us at www.cultivatingplay.org. Cultivatingplay.org. You can email me at jeff@cultivatingplay.org, Twitter @cultivatingplay. And so we'd love to visit with you.
Well, and Jeff, you've been generous enough to also be joining me for a new mastermind that we've launched this semester. And it's just been such a joy to have you along with all of those other amazing principals to meet weekly. And you've also, our listeners are kind of getting a little taste of what some of the things that we've been doing in the mastermind, because you're leading the study that we're doing together over my book. And so it's just such a privilege to be back in the room with you. Last week, you asked me so many really pointed questions that were ones others have not asked me before. So this is kind of fun for me to be on the other side of the microphone. So I'm just going to place it back with you, because I know from our previous conversations that you had unpacked several parts of the book that you had questions about. So let's just jump in.
Yeah, we're wrapping up the last episode where we were talking about what are you doing, how are you maximizing your time, and you talk about and honestly, I can't remember the name of the book. It's in, and I'm sure I could find it.
20,000 days. 20,000
days, yes. And so, and the gentleman referred to again to reiterate last episode. 75 years is the average lifespan. So 27,345 days, I think, is what it comes out to. And so if we're listening and we're reading that, if we're wanting to maximize every single day, and we know as we aren't looking back, but looking forward, we want to know how many days we have left. So we pull out the calculator on the phone, and the reality is wow, I don't have any time to waste. And so how am I going to maximize every single day that I have with teachers and students and those people across the path? So talk about that a little bit, Will.
Yeah, well, there's just something powerful, I think, about perspective. And I used to have that same conversation with students. It was actually one of the orientation meetings I would have with incoming freshmen. I would talk about that very example with them, about how many days I had lived, how many days I probably have left, how many days they had lived up until this point, and how many days of high school they would have to accomplish their high school diploma. And then I would paint for them that final picture. Someday, you're going to be walking across the stage here with the students in this room. I'm going to be standing on that stage. You're going to be in a cap and a gown. I'm going to be handing you a diploma or shaking your hand, and your parents are going to be there, your guardians, your loved ones taking pictures. And that's going to be an amazing moment of celebration. But to get to that moment, you have to value every day that you step into this building. And how can we make sure that every single day counts? Well, that applies to us too, Jeff. And I remember, I think this story may be in the book, but I remember several years into my school admin when I had reached a lot of my goals. I was a site principal. I was doing the things that I'd been wanting to do for a long time. And I was talking to a man who was much younger than I am, who was just starting his family, just starting a business. And he was just kind of celebrating he was out of debt. He was a young father. His business was doing well. And I was celebrating with him. And I was like, this reminds me of when I was younger, and we were reaching goals and stuff too. And he asked me a really honest, but innocent question, an innocently powerful question. And he said, so what are some of the life goals you have for the next 5 years? Well, and I remember just stopping and realizing I had to answer honestly. And I just said to him, well, honestly, right now, I feel like my goal is just to survive. But when I walked away from that conversation, I was haunted by my answer. And just a couple of weekends later, I was camping with my son, Jack, and he had gone to sleep and I was sitting up late. And I was actually reading a really good book by Michael Hyatt. I'm not sure if I even mentioned this in the book, but he had written a book called Platform. And in that book, he talks a lot about those same ideas that you talked about in that book, 20,000 Days. And I was just really challenged, like, how can I set a goal for myself 5 years from now, which means that I have to invest something every single day to get there. And believe it or not, that's actually when I started blogging. I decided I was going to make a goal of writing something to share out with other education leaders every week for the next 5 years and see what happens. Well, it's been several years since then, Jeff, and anybody who's listened to this podcast for any amount of time knows that since then I've written 3 books. That when you said 4, it's because I had a reprint of one of them. So I've written 3 books. I've got 215 episodes of a podcast. I've had the opportunity to travel to probably at least 17 states and speak and present on the things that I'm doing. And there's so much more that I dream of being able to do in this profession, but I don't think any of that would have happened if I hadn't decided 5 years before that to invest every single day in something that I wanted to accomplish, just like I had told my students. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
No.
but I think, but when we create that kind of focus for ourselves, then I think we give ourselves more opportunities than really we've ever dreamed could happen.
Yeah, as the principal or administrator of the building, we are really good at creating the vision a lot of times for other people. But you're right. If you're professing goal setting, but you're not a goal setter, you're not going to be very authentic, and it's not going to be real to them. I have to share this. One of the things I'm most proud of as principal, and I was there 14 years in the same building as a high school principal. I didn't do this until I did not get to experience it to fruition, but because I graduated and moved to repurposed when this class came around. But there was a class that I started with, and I'm not sure why it took me so long to do this, but at freshman orientation, we called it Bulldog Camp, I would create the visual for the end result. And we literally, my assistant principals, they did not like me for this, but they appreciated the outcome. We literally set up chairs in the gym, on the gym floor, as if the same way that they were going to be sitting when they were going to graduation practice. So we sat the whole program started with both parents and kids in the bleachers. And then at some point, I told the kids to come down out of the bleachers and go sit wherever they want. And some would sit immediately up front, and I said, look, the main thing is that all of you 4 years from now have a place to sit, okay? But where you sit is up to you. You can be in these first 2 rows and be in the top 10%, but if just being in the room is enough, then this is what it's going to look like. So so that was the first thing we did every year. And that was the last thing because I would tell those kids at graduation practice that were seniors, I would say, look around, practicing mindfulness, look around. I said, isn't it crazy that the second to last thing that you do in your high school career is what was the first thing you did when you were a freshman in high school, and sit in a
Oh.
chair in a gymnasium floor, and the parents, oh my gosh, the parents were bawling in the stands because they're already projecting their kid 4 years from now. So anyways,
Jeff, I'm just getting goosebumps, man. That is such a powerful image. And Principal Matters listeners, we could stop the show right now, which we're not gonna, but that is such a golden nugget, Jeff, of projecting for them an image and a vision of what they will be. And man, what a great visual. And listeners, you might be hearing this and thinking about, your pre-K kids or your eighth graders or your seniors, but whatever age it is, how do we give them an image of what they will be? And that's so good, Jeff. Thank you for sharing that.
You bet. So you talk about learning to climb together. And again, another one of those things that we know is good for us, but we don't always do that because we want to go it alone so often. And so, you talk about why your friendships matter. And, in my work with play, we ask the question, who are your people? And in other words, we win with people. So talk about that a little bit.
Sure. There's some things that I share little glimpses of in the book that you referred to in the last episode too, which when my daughter and I went to visit, it was my mother-in-law who lives in a memory care center. So she has pronounced Alzheimer's, and she has forgotten who most of us are, but she can still remember how to sing her favorite hymns. And so when we do visit, which during COVID, that's not been possible, but when we do visit, we get to just sing hymns, and she can remember all those words, even though she may not be able to remember my name anymore. But there's so many moments in our life, Jeff, like a parent who's losing their memory, or for me, 6 years ago when my oldest brother, who was in his late 40s at the time, had an unexpected heart attack and passed away. And our family was just devastated from the loss of a young man who there was no way in the world we could have planned for something like that. And in school leadership, we spend so much time serving and investing in other people, but when the kids leave the building and when the work day is over, or even in your case, in my case, when we've left that work and we've moved on to new things, some people don't leave. And they're usually the ones whom you've invested other time with than just school. And so the friendships that you have, for me, my faith community, and obviously family, those are the relationships that are going to sustain you when you run out of self-motivation, when you run out of hope, when you run into those situations where no amount of self-talk can really take you to help you move forward. And so if you're listening to this right now, Principal Matters listeners, and there's not other people in your life with whom you're investing outside of school, that has to be a priority too. Because if you have never experienced one of those moments where you've come to the end of yourself, you've either not lived long enough or you've not lived reflectively enough, as I heard someone say recently, because it will happen. And when that does happen to you, it's going to be those meaningful relationships that are going to be a part of what sustains you and helps you move beyond that. So I don't know if that answers the question, Jeff, but that's some context from my own experience.
Well, and that is a great segue into chapter 6 when you talk about your spirituality and your faith, and this work that we do. And so, we work in a public place. We are everybody's principal, all backgrounds, all beliefs, all nationalities, demographics, et cetera. So how do you manage that, your faith and what we do?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And, Principal Matters listeners will be hearing another conversation that I have with Sonia Lopez Morales, who is a principal from San Antonio. And we had some deep conversations about my book too, as another friend who has endorsed the book and gave me some reflections as a practicing principal. And I can't wait to share that with you, Jeff. But Sonia and I actually, before we started that episode, she confided to me that she had been reading her Bible that morning. She's Catholic, and I'm Protestant. And I explained in that chapter in the book that if you're not religious, this is still a chapter that will, I hope, help you understand the context of how faith can provide you strength and perspective in your work, but also how it provides other people whom you're serving with perspective in their lives and in their work and in your community. And so much of what you experience as a principal, Jeff, I know you know this, there are so many times where things that happen within your school go way beyond your ability as a principal or an educator to know how to console the hearts of kids and families. And a faith community often can provide that context in ways that you can't. So I think it's so important for school leaders to welcome members of their faith community as a part of the support for their schools, because you're going to have students who that's helpful for, and whether that's a Christian faith like mine or a different faith representation. I think it's just so important. But one of the things that Sonia and I talked about that morning was just the reality of relying on something that's deeper than even contemporary or modern knowledge. And so part of the beauty I find in, for instance, reading scripture is knowing that I'm connecting with content and history and story that transcends time. In the conversation that we had in that conversation was because she had been reading the book of Matthew. And so Principal Matters listeners, please forgive me if I sound like I'm becoming a Sunday school teacher, but I just said to her, it's one of my favorite books because in that book, when Jesus gives his Sermon on the Mount, this is what Sonia and I explored. In what other context in your day do you ever hear anybody say that the answer to the way we confront our culture is to love our enemies? I can't think of any other. I didn't hear that on CNN this morning, and I haven't read that in the New York Times in the last year. I haven't picked up one education book that's told me to do that. But I find that when I open up something that's much deeper and connected to my faith than I can find in a contemporary or modern, or as you just showed me in the note that you have in your office, Jeff, love your neighbor. And so those truths, I think, help us transcend the moments that we're in and help us find perspective in our leadership.
And that is perfect, because my next question was we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we had at Magnolia High School, we created our own hierarchy, because if we felt like every student beyond the food and shelter needed to know that they were valuable, complete, and loved in order for us to become excellent, that led to eminence. And if we didn't take care of that, we honestly believe that if every student did not hear that, every adult in that building did not hear that and believe that, then we wouldn't achieve that ultimate, which is the self-actualization. So, but you talk about the later writings, talks about transcendence. And so will you talk about that, to transcend? You mentioned that.
I want to give credit where credit is due. I was at an AMLE conference several years ago when Professor Scott Barry Kaufman from the University of Pennsylvania shared some of Maslow's research, and he was getting ready to publish a book where he explores the fact that when most of us look at that diagram from Maslow, we see the psychological is the foundation, then safety, love, belonging, esteem, and the very peak of that triangle is self-actualization. But Professor Kaufman explained that in Maslow's later writings, he actually placed transcendence above that. And that was an eye-opening moment for me, because I think so often when we're working with students and educators, we have this hope that eventually all of this learning will lead to a place where they actually understand themselves really well, that they've reached that self-actualization. And that's why so many educators you hear will say, that we have to first speak to Maslow before we can start, worrying about pedagogy. And I think both are important, by the way, if we're going to be good educators. But for me, the idea of transcendence is the ability to take it to the next step. I mean, I want to be able to understand myself, but I want to also be able to understand myself in the context of the rest of the world and in the context of the universe and in the context of the eternal. Because because for me, at least, in my experience, if all of my experience is centered around me understanding myself, and that's the limit of it, then I feel like that ends when I die. And I certainly don't want my life's reflection to others to be how well I understand me. I want my ability to serve and connect with other people to be an expression that I understand something bigger than me. And so for me, that's where spirituality is so important, because it takes us beyond ourselves into something that's even in a beautiful way mysterious and inexplicable, but takes me, at least personally, to a place of worship. And so for me, that creates an inspiration and meaning for me, and a peace for me that I've never found anywhere else.
To transcend. I mean, that's a topic to contemplate and to acknowledge. So you talk about, also you give the illustration of the preacher and the wealthy man, and they're having a conversation over lunch about, the preacher telling, I guess he had preached a sermon about God really owning everything, and of course the wealthy rancher had a struggle with that, because to give the God owns everything. I worked so hard for this, and bottom line, he says, is that can you ask me that question? The preacher was silent for a while, then he finally replied, "Can you ask me that question again in 100 years?" The fact that, again, going back to those 20,000 days, I can remember sitting in my office at the school in my last months, realizing for the first time that this really was not my office. This was just a place where I got to play, and create, and that someone else would take my place, and then someone else would take their place, and on and on and on, that it was all temporary. And the realization that I was there for 14 years, but it only takes 3 years for a whole student body to graduate out, and lots of teachers to leave. You could stay there 50 years, and it still only takes 3 years for kids to graduate out. And you walk into a building and no one may not even know who you are. You may see remnants of what you've done. So talk about the temporariness of what we do again.
Yeah, well, and I think this is going to be a great way to wrap up this conversation, Jeff, because I end the book with the chapter on legacy, and of course, then later I talk about play, which you and I can celebrate later because that's your expertise. But one of the things I think is so important about legacy is that I like to tell principals two things, and if anybody listening to my show for a long time, you've heard me say this before, and these sound like contradictory statements, but I'll try to make this as clear as I can. First of all, you're not as important as you think. And that's hard for people to hear, because as leaders, we have big egos. We like to think that we're super important, that, that without us, things would fall apart. But ultimately, your leadership is not about you anyway. It's about the people you're serving. So at the end of the day, it's how are you investing in others so that they can become the kind of teachers, the kinds of students, the kinds of school community that could really live and thrive without you. You need to keep that perspective in mind. And then the flip side of that statement is you are more important than you think. Because every little thing that you do does matter. And that's not for a guilt trip. That's just to remind you that it's the small things that people take notice of. So your integrity, your trust, your honesty, your ability to connect with people one-on-one, your carefulness to follow up and keep your promises, all of those things matter because they're helping you model and demonstrate the kind of relationships you want other people to have around you too. And people emulate what they see in leadership. They just do. So when you're in that position of authority, you also have that responsibility. So keeping both those things, it's the healthy tension to keep in mind that what you're doing is temporary, but you're also building a legacy that should live on longer than you do. But at the end of the day, people will forget your name. They're going to forget that you were the principal of that school. And that's okay, because the stories, the lives of the people that you did touch and affect, your influence on their lives lives on, and their influence on your life lives on long after you're out of that office. So I don't know if that answered the question, Jeff, but that's I think a helpful mindset for me to have when I think about our legacy.
Yeah. Well, the reality is that the school is more than the building. And it's, again, it's the people and the relationships that you build through, through that, your time together, through that limited time that you have together. I think that this book is, this is something that we should have, that every person considering education in school should have in their methods class. It's not, we don't talk about those things in those stages. It's almost an after the fact. It's after you're in, and I'm saddened, like you, sometimes, that we talk to so many people out there in education that are sucked dry, so to speak, that are over the top exhausted because they give everything they have, and so your reminder, to pause, breathe, and flourish, and to live that life, your best life, the best version of yourself, to be that best educator, so you can put on that mask first and be there for others. It's such an important message, Will.
Well, thank you, Jeff. And Principal Matters listeners, I hope that this conversation has been encouraging for you, because the last thing that we want is for you to feel guilt in the work that you do. Like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling like the shell of a person I was, or I'm running on empty. And that's a reality that all of us face regularly during COVID and not during COVID. But I do think that hopefully one lesson you can pull from this is what's a daily action that you can take, just one thing that you can take to reconnect with what's the most meaningful in your life, and take some time to reflect on that, to reinvest in that, and then to live out from that. And so Jeff Springer, it's been such a joy to talk with you about this book. And Principal Matters listeners, I hope that you'll take some time this week to pause and breathe and flourish, because what you do matters. And we'll talk to you again soon. If you'd like other free resources like this one, you can check out all my posts at williamdparker.com.